Okay, thank you. Now, before we get in the presentation, I just did want to mention, do I want to mention? Let me see here. Nope, oh, the one thing I wanted to mention was next month, on the November 12th meeting at 6:30, it's going to be Leavenworth History and Stories with Lance Stroud. So I'm looking forward to that. That'll be good. So Lance Stroud next week, or next month. Now, we're going to talk about English, the history of English tonight. And I hope I will have succeeded if I bring up one or two things that you didn't know before. But we're going to see if we can accomplish that tonight. So if you go back to the very earliest years of English, you'd find things like in 1814, Moses Smith bought some land near what would become Hartford and then English. And then this is a list of some of the early settlers. Brown, Cummins, more Browns, Landis. And what year did Crawford County become a county?
1818.
1818. Very good, very good. By 1828, county orders elections held in the home of John Crawford. I am old, but I'm not that old. And I'd still like to know how I connect to this John Crawford. In 1839-40, Gregory is granted a license for a store and a tippling house, a saloon. And then in 1840, W.W. Cummins records the plat for Hartford in the Fredonia courthouse, because the courthouse was in Fredonia at that point. Well, it goes on, and but if you could describe Hartford in those early 1800s, the description I heard was a few log huts, a log schoolhouse, a church, and some businesses, including a blacksmith shop. And it wasn't until 1884 that English was incorporated. Now, keep that little thought in mind, because that's going to make a difference here a little bit later in the story. But, earlier on when they did record the plat for Hartford, well, it was time to start getting people interested. And so, in the county paper, you see this little advertisement. By the way, this stuff is all from materials from the courthouse, or from the Historical Society mostly. And these newspaper articles that you're going to see up here on the screen, they're back there in those binders on the desk. Really interesting place to look. But in 1839 comes this advertisement for there's lots for sale in Hartford. It's been beautifully situated at the Three Forks of the Little Blue River, which would later become a problem. It's 12 miles, and here it lists what it's close to, so you get a sense of what the important towns were at the time. 12 miles from Milltown, 30 from Jasper, 13 from Leavenworth, 16 from Paoli. It's near the center of the town, and the state road from Milltown to Jasper and from Leavenworth to Mount Pleasant goes through it, and the Troy Road. I don't know where the Troy Road was, but I guess it was close to here. So, they're getting started. They're trying to sell land. And then what happens? Well, in 1871, the world changed for this sleepy little town of Hartford, because somebody had the idea of, we want to get enough money to build a railroad between St. Louis and Louisville, and it ends up going straight through Hartford, Indiana, this little town. Now, this also is going to bear in the question of how our name changed, but we'll get to that a little bit later. But it is interesting that as soon as this railroad plan comes into being, all sorts of things start to pop and crack, and we'll talk about that. But whoever named this railroad was really trying to mess me up, because I remember it was 3 or 4 years ago that a family member was writing to another family member long time ago, long before airplanes, and they're saying, but you know, we'll be going through the county, you can catch me at the airline. And I'm thinking, what airline? And what did they call the railroad that came through here? The airline. Long before there were airplanes transporting people, the railroad was called the airline. So now, what else is going on? Let's get a little bit of a slice of life in Hartford from articles in the newspaper. This article is from, do you know where the Crawford County Democrat was first published? What town? Leavenworth. I think of the Crawford County Democrat as an English paper, but it was the Leavenworth paper originally.
In Milltown. In Milltown.
And Milltown? Okay, now this article just explains that they're surveying land and deciding on which route to take. There's a northern and a southern route, and it's going to run 22 miles through the county. And it lists at the end of this article a whole list of property owners that are on the route of the railroad. This is August of 1871. People are getting excited. Now, in the Leavenworth Crawford County Democrat, in June of 1872, you find this article. Because now we're going from a little town to a proper-sized town. Look at this. The McElliott Hotel, Hartford, Indiana. But we had two hotels. A thing I would have never supposed. There was the McElliott Hotel, and there was the Railroad Hotel. But check out this McElliott Hotel. It has been recently refitted and furnished in good style for the accommodations of guests. A first-class saloon is also connected with the hotel. They'll find good accommodations here. And the Railroad Hotel has good stables. But of course, you didn't need to park your car, you had to park your horses in those days. So, we've got hotels now. What else have we got? We've got stores, businesses. Look at this, Sloan & Brothers store. You can get your hardware and Queensware. What is Queensware? Anybody know? I haven't got any idea either. But it says there, groceries, hardware, and Queensware. You can get ready-made clothing, shirts and underclothing, hats and caps, boots and shoes. It's all at Sloan's & Brothers. Now, what else is going on? Oh, look at this. The Railroad Hotel and Saloon. You see up there, look what they've got here. What was stylish at the time? It's the best hotel in southern Indiana. It has the best of wines and liquors and cigars, and it's got a livery and a stable connected with the house, and reasonable rates. Call me, PM Huddleston. Oh, thank you. There we go. That's the Railroad Hotel. I'm not sure exactly where it was either, because I haven't found a record that shows where these individual hotels were. That would be fun to find out.
One of them was down there by the drinking ground. Where the wet place there.
Really?
That's a well, yeah.
Well, then I bet that was one of these two.
Yeah, that's one of them.
Now, let's go on to the next. Let's get to those newspapers here. In the course of putting together this history for English, I learned a lot about newspapers in Crawford County. In 1896, the Crawford County Democrat is bought by William and Hal Ellsworth and moved from Leavenworth to English. So that's 1896. 1908, D.W. Flanagan buys the newspaper. And in 1916, his brother Arthur buys the paper. Now, in 1918, Arthur Flanagan buys the rival paper, The News, and it's later called The News Messenger. Remember the name of that one? News Messenger. So that's where that came from. Now, Flanagan printed, here's the interesting, Flanagan printed the same stories in both papers. The only difference was the editorial column and the masthead. So he was an efficient businessman and publisher. Now, in 1948, ownership passes to his daughter, Martha Jane Flanagan. I remember her. And in 81, the papers were sold to O'Bannon Publishing. In 1991, the last issue of the Crawford County Democrat / News Messenger, and the beginning of 1992 was the first edition of the Clarion. And the editor of the Clarion, Sarah Combs, who's the granddaughter of Arthur Flanagan, sort of stayed in the family. So I thought that was sort of interesting about the papers we have had here in Crawford County. Every town ought to have the circus come along, right? Well, here we've got the circus is coming to English, or to Hartford at this point. Now, it is interesting because it talks about a crowd of, well, it's a big, big deal. The largest crowd of people assembled in any town in the county at one time. It talks about, I don't know how many thousand people show up. But check out the last sentences, and I'm going to read it to you, very bottom. The performance was passably good, and would no doubt have been better had they arrived in town sooner. I guess they were late. As it was, it succeeded in the principal object, that of gobbling up all the loose change in the county. There's a comment in there, I think. Okay, now, what else do we have here? Now, they ran into some problems building that railroad, because this wasn't a government project funded by the federal government or the state government. These were some entrepreneurs that had to get the funding to build a railroad from St. Louis to Louisville. A big, big job. And here in this newspaper article, we learned that they've run into some problems getting the financing together, and it talks about them even going to London and Europe to help sell bonds to support the construction of this railroad. It could have fallen apart right then and there, but it didn't. They were able to put it together, and by the way, this is 1874, and I've got the suspicion that William English, whose statue we have today, I've got the suspicion that maybe William English entered into the scene for Hartford at that point. This article goes on, and I won't go through more of reading through that, but a copy of all these slides will be in the 3-ring binder of presentations that we do here, so you can sort of read through those. Now, meanwhile, back at the ranch, another interesting thing happens. In 1874, all the excitement is because of what? Moving the county seat from Leavenworth to Hartford. Now, I've read a little bit more about that, and I've come to understand that it wasn't as if folks in English just went over one night and stole the records and moved it. Apparently, there was court decisions to move it, but the Leavenworth side of the equation wasn't moving as fast as the English side of the equation thought necessary. And so there is an amazing set of stories in the book back here called Tales of Leavenworth that we've got here that tells more details about that. It's really fun to read. But upshot of this is that yes, the county seat did move from Leavenworth to Hartford. Now, having that happen, let's get to the other part of this story. Why did Hartford become English? And look at that picture there I've got. Sherry and I went up through northern Indiana in July, I guess it was, and there along the road as we headed north on the interstate was the sign that said, Hartford City, 1/2 mile. And I'm thinking to myself, there's the town in Indiana that got our name. So how did they get it? Well, here's what we found out about this other Hartford. The other Hartford, its name has changed over time. It was originally called Hart's Ford because it was where you crossed a stream in that area, Hart's Ford. That later became Hartford, and then that later became Hartford City. So that's how they ended up as Hartford City nowadays. Its It was made the county seat of Blackford County, been that since 1837. And Blackford County, I don't think I'd ever heard of that. Any of you? It was news to me. But they are still the county seat since 1837. And consider that the plat for our Hartford here wasn't filed until 1840. So they already were the county seat and had the name before we even had a plat. Hartford, up north, was incorporated in 1867. Well, our Hartford wouldn't be incorporated until 1884, years later. And then, of course, they had the gas boom of 1887, another thing I learned about. You can go, well, you know, Roberta reminds me of all those gas and oil lease books that we have in the archive there. Well, apparently this was a big, big deal all through Indiana, and they really had a gas boom up there. It was called the Indiana Gas Boom of 1887.
John, can I say something?
You betcha.
There is a city next to Hartford City called Gas City. And Upland, that's where I went to school my first grade. It's Upland, then Gas City and Hartford City. They're all in a row. I don't remember if Hartford City's first or Gas City, but all three of those are in a row there. And that's where I went to school in the first grade.
Ah, amazing. So we have
Taylor University is there at Upland.
Oh, we know Taylor. Yeah. Well, it's a pretty part of the state, and we just haven't found our gas and oil yet, right? It's coming. It's coming. Okay, so since they've already got our name of Hartford, it ends up that our community decided to change our name to English. And now we're going to talk a little bit about that change of name. But first of all, consider this news article that I found in 1897 in the Crawford County Democrat. It's talking about how the outlook is bright for an increased population. Calm reasoning points to that end. A natural advantage all county seats have. And it's interesting to see the old style of writing newspapers too. And let's see, enterprise and the property owners and businessmen wield a powerful influence. And this article is just a glowing, long article of how wonderful English is and what's going on here and why it's the place you want to be. It's almost like the Crawford County Democrat is selling the area. And I guess they were. Here's more of it. And you can read this some other time. I won't read through that to you. So English really is, now it's got the railroad that came through in the 70s and the 80s and 90s. It's growing, it's prospering, it's a wonderful place to be. So now let's talk a little bit about where did this new name of English come from? Well, I think everybody has heard of William English, but did you know who he was? Let me tell you about him. He was born in 1822 in Lexington, Indiana. Do you know where Lexington is? Scott County. Yeah, not too far from here, really. He went to Hanover College. He studied teaching and law. In 1850, he was the principal secretary of the Indiana Constitutional Convention. So he was out there and involved in things. As a matter of fact, in 1851, after the Constitutional Convention, he's elected to the Indiana House of Representatives and becomes the Speaker of the House at age 29. A thing I don't know could happen today. But he was in the U.S. House of Representatives, from 1852 to 1860. So he's involved in Indiana government, he's involved in national government through the House of Representatives in this pre-Civil War time frame. Now, he decides to get out of government in 1860, and this is also where another connection may be about why we changed our name to English. So what does he decide to do after he gets out of the House of Representatives? Well, he established the First National Bank of Indianapolis and was the president of it for 14 years. That's 1863. So this is during the Civil War. He's listed as a banker in the 1870 census and a capitalist in the 1880 census. And this is where you got to wonder about the ties. Remember, I was saying it just a few minutes ago that in the 1870s, the railroad company was trying to scramble and find funding for building that railroad. Well, he was a capitalist and a banker at that same period of time in Indiana. And I do wonder if perhaps he helped them get funding settled for that railroad that we've got today. It's just a question or a possibility. Now, he's also famous, I think we all know about him being a vice presidential candidate. He was the vice presidential running mate for Winfield Scott Hancock, and they were running against James Garfield and Chester Arthur on the Republican ticket. And get this, the voter turnout that year was 78%. That we could have that every election. 78%. It was 66% in the 2020 election, by the way, so let's go back up to 78. Garfield won the popular vote by 1,898 votes, but a much larger margin in the electoral college. And Garfield was assassinated in 1881, and Chester Arthur became the president. Just think about that. If the other ticket had won, then William English might have become our president instead. Now, because of his involvement in Indiana government, national government, and in that presidential election, he was also president of the Indiana Soldiers and Sailors Monument Commission. He wrote a 2-volume history of the Northwest Territory. He was very involved as a historian. He loved history, so we could appreciate that. He died in 1896. So, lo and behold, in 1897, we have this article in his honor, the illustrious statesman William H. English. His statue should stand in our public square, a worthy work which all should endorse. The organization of I love this name, a monumental association should be completed. Let's get a statue to Mr. English. And then this next article is talking about how he was an untiring friend to the struggling little town. So this is where I'm thinking maybe he did help get the railroad through here, maybe he helped get the financing going through here, maybe he even had some part in getting the county seat moved here. I don't know, but you got to wonder. There was something that the town of English was very grateful for his friendship. Many more sections in this article about arranging for the statue, getting it made, getting it moved by railroad here to English, buying a piece of property, the Dembo property that would become the little town square next to the railroad and close to the center of town. This all ends in the statue being dedicated on June the 23rd of 1900. And that picture, oh, I wish I knew who was in that picture, because apparently everybody in the area came out, even though it was a really rainy period of time. They came out. I'd love to know which of our family members are standing in that picture before us right there. But that was when the dedication was, and it was, there's detailed description of who spoke, who sang, what they did. This was a really amazing event. I'd love to have had film of that. It was a big, big deal. Now, you know, there is another statue of English. Matter of fact, there's two. The two other statues of English. There's one like we have that's in Sellersburg. You can go see it. And there's also his bust that's in the State House Rotunda in Indianapolis. So there is that fun fact. Now, and here's our statue of William H. English, which is down at the old fairgrounds in English. And that is a brief history of English. I hope you found some little tidbits that were new to you that you hadn't heard of before. But it did remind me of the fact that English went from a little sleepy back roads town or settlement to a bustling, busy community, thriving community. In this case, because of the railroad and other things like that. But those were our relatives, and so when you think about it, well, it is interesting to see what they did, and that there were movers and shakers there that saw opportunities and made it happen. They tried things, they built things. The people that built that, that's our heritage. That's our family members and members of our community that did all that. And so let us be on the lookout for the next big opportunities or things that we can use to build our community, and perhaps someday somebody will be doing a presentation about how English not only went boom, bust, but boom yet again for who knows what reason the next time around. So be optimistic, be hopeful. Hopefully things can happen. That is the presentation. Any comments, any questions, any thoughts?
I think there's statues in Scottsburg instead of Sellersburg.
Oh, Scottsburg?
Yeah, I think
Oh,
it is too.
yeah.
I think it is too.
You are exact.
You had Summersburg.
Oh, I said the wrong name. It says Sellersburg. Thank you, Bob. Any other questions or comments?
I was just wondering that, who owned that land, and he said that Dimbo, there's a Dimbo Cemetery out to the end of that road that goes by the park. I was wondering how that got its name, and so that's the reason.
It must be, because one of those news articles talked about them getting some land from the Dimbo family to put that statue on.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So someone, the Dimbos lived ahead out on that road that goes by Tunnel Hill. But evidently, they might have had connections over there with that.
Which I didn't know, which was good. Well, look, so thanks for your attention on this.